Hi everyone, welcome to the Electrification Academy. The Academy is a series of webinars on how to enable electrification. My name is Marion Santini. I work for the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP. RAP is a global independent NGO. Our aim is to advance policy innovation and thought leadership in the energy community. Today, we will be talking about a very innovative policy tool, which is social leasing for electric cars and heat pumps. I have asked my colleague Duncan Gibb to join us today. Duncan is an expert in clean heating deployment. Hi, Duncan. Duncan and I have been willing to work on social leasing for quite some time now, and we think it's a promising model. And at the same time, we're aware that the design of such a policy is challenging to reach out to low-income households. So we were quite excited when we saw that the European Commission was planning to issue a guidance on social leasing. Duncan, perhaps to put us all on the same page, could you say a few words about social leasing?
Thanks, Marion. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited about this webinar and the two experts we have with us today on the topic. So as many of you listening to me may know, leasing in general is a normal, well-established business model for vehicles. In the past, this is how you can easily own a car without paying for it up front. And it's also being rolled out in different heat pump markets. So with leasing, with rather than just buying the car up front, you can rent it essentially, and potentially at the end of this rental contract, you have the option to own the vehicle or to own the heat pump or any other type of clean product. So that's leasing. Social leasing is where we have a government that provides a framework that allows the establishment of leasing contracts with a specific focus on low-income households. So this means that there's a policy objective to make sure this leasing is targeting low-income households and focusing on them. So the experience with social leasing for heat pumps especially is quite limited. So this is why we wanted to talk about it today.
Thanks for the introduction, Duncan. But before we dig into the content, I should let you know that our session today is recorded, and you can type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the page. We'll get back to the questions during the Q&A at the end of the two presentations. So let's start and welcome our two speakers, Marie and Jason. We are very happy to welcome Marie Chéron from Transport and Environment and Jason Goldstein from Thermondo. Thank you so much for joining us. Marie, you are an e-mobility expert at NGO Transport and Environment, TNE. Could you tell us a few words about what you do at TNE?
So first of all, thank you for inviting me in this webinar. Our mission as TNE is to promote clean transportation, right to mobility, and to support the transformation of the industrial value chain. But personally, I strongly support EC phase-out from 2018. And I joined TNE 3 years ago now to work on automotive sector and especially on leasing, social leasing. And so we published already two briefing about social leasing in France. And at the end of the month, we will publish a briefing about social leasing in 5 different countries in Europe.
Thank you. So we will get back to this topic in just a minute. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome Jason. Jason, could you tell us about your company, Thermondo, and what you do as a Vice President for Strategic Finance?
Hi, Marion. Yes, thanks. And thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. So first of all, Thermondo, we are Europe's largest heating installer with nearly 45,000 systems installed since we were established in 2013. And our mission is to decarbonize the home or decarbonize the building sector. And we do this today by decarbonizing the home. What does that mean for us? That means we retrofit heat pumps into one and two family homes in Germany. Myself, in a nutshell, my role at Thermondo is that I make sure we have enough financing to be able to offer heat pumps to our customers for a low monthly rate instead of a high upfront cost.
Thanks a lot, Jason. So again, we'll get into the details in a minute. So Again, reminder that if you have questions to Marie and Jason during the presentations, please pop them into the Q&A box. We'll get back to them at the end of the two presentations, unless I see that there is a need for immediate clarification. In that case, I'll ask the question straight away. So let's start with Marie. Marie, we've asked you to tell us about the French experience with social leasing for electric cars. This was a very innovative policy. Could you tell us about what happened in France and what we can learn from this experience?
Right. Let's go. I share my screen. Okay. Is it okay? You can see my screen?
Yes, perfectly well.
Perfect. So I will share the experience and I will tell you the story of social leasing in France and give you some perspective about the next step for social leasing in France. And I will finish with my recommendation. The history of social leasing in France, it was launched by a presidential candidate's political promise for an EV at 100 per month. It was in an interview, and Emmanuel Macron said that he was a candidate. So he made a promise and he said, okay, I want to help middle and low income household to make the transition. And it was in a context of rising fuel prices. And this is true that in France, there was a strong fear of social protest because we had Gilets jaunes a few years before. So it was a big promise because it was at this time it was difficult to imagine something like social leasing. Why? Given it was because of the low availability of entry-level EVs and the reluctance. We can talk about opposition of the industry. That's why nobody believed in social leasing at that time. But one and a half year after, the scheme was finally launched in December 2023. But in the beginning, it was a political promise. And I make a short zoom about the car market, because when we talk about social leasing, it's very important to know and to precise what is the objective, what is the goal. And for cars, when we talk about cars, we talk about the market of cars, of new cars. And we can observe that the price of cars have increased by 46% since 10 years. So this is an excessive increase. And so that can explain why there is a difficulty for car makers to sell EVs today, and why they have some difficulty to accept to produce more small BEVs. And more small BEV, I mean more affordable BEV. And so this is why the automotive market is, we can say that is blocked. So the automotive market is blocked, and so the electric transition is so. This explains why the electric transition is difficult, and there is a problem of acceptability when you talk about shifting to electric vehicle. We can consider in this context that electric cars are mainly used today by wealthy individuals. But this population benefit from several subsidies over the last few years, and this feeling of inequity in the population. And so that also explains why the French middle and working classes are far removed from EVs. To precise this element, I started saying that the price of cars are very high, and especially for a few years ago. But when you rent a car, you have to pay a first rent, which is almost several thousand euros. So that means that this is an important barrier for middle and low income class. That's why they are far from EV. So this was a context. So social leasing in France, in this context, it has been launched, as I said, late 2023 in France. And this was the main element to keep in mind when we talk about the design of the scheme. So it was an agreement. Social leasing is an agreement between French government and leasing companies and car makers. The subsidy for social leasing in France, this is an addition of two different subsidies. The existing bonus, which is a subsidy for new electric cars, and the social leasing subsidy. And the maximum of this addition was 13,000 euros, which is big, and we will talk again about that. And the bonus itself is conditional in France on achieving an environmental score. That means that this is something with environmental condition to give an advantage for made in EU cars. So this was the element of the agreement between the French government and leasing companies. What was the offer? The offer was last year 20 models from the segment A to small vans. The rental price was from 49 euros to 150 euros per month. There was no first payment required, but insurance was not included. It was 3 years contract with or without purchase options. Who were the beneficiaries? The beneficiaries were, there was two important criteria, income criteria, a reference tax income per unit of less than 15,000 euros, and a car dependency criteria. That means that beneficiaries live more than 15 kilometers from their place of work and drive more than 8,000 kilometers per year. These are the main elements of the scheme design. As a result, there were more than 90,000 applications made in 1.5 months. And so the global amount of application accepted was 50,000. The scheme was closed in February 2024, and it will be reopened in 2025 before summer. The cost for 2024 was 650 million euros, and the total budget for EV subsidy is 1.5 billion. So our message in France, what we can think about that? The first thing we say, okay, this is a success. Why? Because this shows that low income and middle income are ready to switch to EVs. It was something important in the political context. People are ready if there is affordable BEV. Small BEV demand is high. This means that this message must be heard by car makers who must to produce small and affordable cars for people. The limit of the system, and I would like to insist on that, the limit of the system is that there is multiple, but the main limits are the very high subsidy amount, the lack of transparent system of evaluation, maybe also an insufficient environmental criteria for vehicles. The leasing period was limited to 3 years only, and also a windfall effect because of the political context, etc. These are the main limits. I have figures on who was the first half part of beneficiaries, because we have an interim evaluation that was published by the minister last July, but it has figure I can share with you if you want. Our general view on social leasing. We support social leasing in TNE because for us this is an effective and necessary policy measure, but it is temporary. It's a tool to accelerate adoption in the early EV market phase. And social leasing is a relevant solution to provide targeted support to the vulnerable, low and middle income categories, because we already have a bonus. The bonus is for everybody, but It does not encourage car makers to produce small and affordable projects. That's why social leasing is a social measure. It's also something like it's a signal for industrial stakeholders. Another thing is that French social leasing is not the unique possible design. Of course, it has been really expensive, of course, but we can do social leasing without a big amount of subsidies. So it's possible to do in another way. And so it's not a model. And so the third and last thing on this general view is that we recommend that the Social Climate Fund it could be used as a source of revenue for member states to support vulnerable households, and in particular in southern and eastern countries. This will be the topic of our next publication at the end of the month.
We have about 2 minutes.
Perfect. We will have a new social leasing scheme in France in 2025. It will be launched next September with an announcement expected in early summer. And the budgetary support will be provided by energy saving certificates. So this system is already used to finance the purchase of clean vehicles, particularly HDVs, or the installation of charging points. And this is a system which is widely used in the building sector. The advantage is it's outside of the state budget. So it is not written by the vote every year of the finance bill. But it's also something which is passed on to energy consumer in their bill. So it could be a topic. So there is an open discussion on leasing period, price, and target, but it will be more or less the same system, excepted the way to finance it. And so for the next session, we recommend to renew social leasing in 2025 to replace the bonus. Why? Because we think that it's really important to support middle and low income households. We recommend to reduce the amount of the subsidy to finance more vehicles over a longer period. So that means for other projects compared to cars, that means that you have to find the balance between the amount of the subsidy and the volume of households that are supported with such a scheme. We recommend also to avoid windfall effects. This is a political question. So that means that social leasing could be positioned considering the reality of the market. It's also, and this is the first recommendation, a lever to set environmental conditions for vehicle, but for products in general. So environmental conditions, that could mean also efficiency of the products. The fifth recommendation is to set up a precise evaluation of the scheme. Because in French administration, we observe that there is a strong need to enhance the social expertise to steer this social policy. And finally, I have to say that in France, we are currently also working about an alternative public or semi-public leasing system to reduce the cost of this public policy. So it could be a public leasing, but it is work in progress. So I would be glad to answer your question if you have, and I hope that this presentation could help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. This was really interesting. I didn't know about the fact that the new scheme will be financed through the Certificat d'économie d'énergie. So it's going to be an interesting debate also on that point. Thanks a lot. I see that questions start to come in the Q&A box, and I invite everyone to keep on adding those questions to this Q&A box, and we are going to come back to those at a later stage after the second presentation. And now I'm going to turn to Jason, who has a hands-on knowledge about heat pump market in Germany. Jason, we've asked you to tell us a bit more about Thermondo's experience with renting heat pumps to clients and how you expect this market to develop in the future. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marion. Here we go. Alrighty. So I'm going to start with a quick overview of Thermondo and our experience. So we were founded in, as I mentioned, 2013 to decarbonize the building sector. Maybe unique for us as well in the space, we have 1,000 employees, of which 600 are craftsmen. So we're doing these installations ourselves, 45,000 of them in existing buildings. When we started in 2013, this was oil and gas systems, not heat pumps. Our mission was to install more efficient oil and gas systems in existing homes with existing systems. This way we could track that we were making a difference as well. And given that Germany is quite, there's not too much new building going on either. This was the most effective market to take on. Importantly, to get this right, we've got our own software in the background. We're trying to make this as efficient as possible. I'm going to speak a bit about the process of changing your heating system and how that is uncomfortable for homeowners. It's a really personal thing and not something you do very often. So I mentioned we launched in 2013. In 2016, we actually started with a rental model for heating systems. This is the oil and gas systems. And then in 2022, we launched heat pumps for rent. And today have around about 10,000 installed. And that gives us about a 3% market share. So while we are the largest, you can tell by this stat that there are very many smaller installers, very local installers in various communities across Germany, and not too many large players. And finally, I think important for us on our mission is that we can now install the full bundle, we call it, right? So you can see from the image in the backdrop, there's a PV system there, there's a heat pump, there's a wall box, there's a battery, and then in the bottom left corner, the home energy management system, because heat pumps take a lot of electricity and they need to be managed effectively so that the total cost of ownership makes sense for the customer. Heat pump rental helps us realize our mission. What do I mean? Well, the problem that we're trying to solve is that we need to decarbonize the building sector. All right. Now, where can we make the most impact? Heat is responsible for 80% of carbon emissions from 1 to 2 family homes, or 1 to 2 family homes in Germany. This basically means the single standing homes, what we call them. So we've established that working on heat makes the most sense. Now, the next question is, and this is more around today, our view, what is the most efficient way to heat a home? Well, for 30,000 euros in installation cost, that's the heat pump. Now, not many people have 30,000 euros, and herein lies the problem. So how can we make heat pumps affordable and accessible to everyone? First, and you could please note in the bottom right, it says prior to 2024, this was heat pump rental. So for us, mid-22 and 23, I liken the changing of a heating system to going to the dentist. It's not comfortable, but everyone's got to go every once in a while. For the heat pump or the, let's say, heating system in the home, this is especially in Germany. It controls your hot water, controls the heat, the temperature of the room, and these two things are very important for standard of living and basic comfort. And if you mess up a heat installation, the effects are very unpleasant for the homeowner. So what we did was we came up with our what we call Thermondo Easy, this rental product. What boxes does it tick? It reduces CO2 emissions. It doesn't have that upfront cost of 30,000. Instead, we front that cost, and you pay a monthly rate of 200 roughly, depending on the house and the system, 200 to 300. You have peace of mind. It's a fixed price. The term is 15 years that you pay for this. In the rental model, because it's technically our heat pump, we offer all service. What we were selling, or what we're offering, is heat is on, right? So that fully covers insurance and repairs and everything. We make sure your heat is on. You still have to make sure that you have electricity to power it, but we will make sure that it's working. Pre-2024, we also ensured you had the best subsidy package. Now, pre-24, the subsidy was, and I'll get into it in a bit more detail, it was roughly 30%. And it was fairly straightforward. So you could get between 25 and 35. It was quite easy to understand. And as the owner of the system, we could apply for the subsidy, which means for the customer, we say, hey, you don't have to go on any websites. Don't worry about any of that. We're going to come in and bring you the lowest cost, most subsidy optimized heat pump. It's going to improve your efficiency and reduce your independence on fossil fuels. Last, but something that's often overlooked, is planning and disposal. So especially if you have a oil system, that old system needs to be removed and responsibly disposed of. And these are considerations that we take in as well. So you just sit back and we will cover it all for a fee. And I mean, this was important, right? Because like I mentioned, changing heat is uncomfortable, and we needed to reduce the friction for homeowners. And important, I said homeowners, we'll get to this probably later, but to reduce their friction, the friction to making this decision and getting this done, because this is the only way we're going to enable the heating transition in Germany. Now, the subsidy I mentioned, 25 to 35%. I'm calling it the BAFA subsidies. BAFA was the organization that was facilitating the subsidies in 22 and 23. And like I said, here we could rent. We took charge of the whole process, and it was really easy for the customer. To talk about how big this impact is on heat pumps, in about early to mid 2023. It leaked that the KfW will now take over subsidies, and the subsidy is going to be as much as 70%, or the rumors 50 to 70% at the time. And the heat pump market crashed by 72%, and we could tell that by the applications and subsidies. Everyone went, you know what? I can actually wait until another year until we know what's going on with the subsidy, because I'm getting so much more, right? This is 70% on 30,000, right? Or 20,000, just over 20,000 euros. It's a significant amount of money. But as part of the change in the subsidy regime, what happened was rental did not get brought along. Interestingly, why, or what's the, how can I explain it in 30 seconds? They built in an income component, which I'm not completely averse to. It makes a lot of sense, right? If your household income is below a certain level, you should receive more subsidy than someone's household income that's above that level, which is great. But the problem was that because the subsidy was linked to the owner of the heat pump, we as Thermondo own the heat pump, we don't technically have a household income, so we would get the minimum subsidy. Now, this means that anyone who wants to rent a heat pump from Thermondo does not get the full 70% subsidy. They can only get 35% subsidy, which really makes it not really heat pump rental not really viable for people. And I mean, counterintuitively for the people who really need the funding. So I think that well-intentioned, badly executed is probably the way I would describe it. But that's what happened. So subsidy changed, and this was basically overnight, 23 to 24, and rental model was out. So we had to pivot and change our business model to something called an installment purchase model. What we call it's an installment purchase model. So how you would, similarly, you would rent a car. In this case, you buy a car on with installment payments, sort of buy now, pay later, if you will. So making the heat pump affordable and accessible again. I'm saying we call it Thermondo Flex this time, and it covers a lot of what we had before in rental. The only difference is that now we can't apply for the subsidy. We can help you. We can help customers explain what documentation they need, etc., because it's quite complex now. But we can't go ahead and apply for it. So we say, hey, this installation is ready. Now you go off and go to the KfW and do your thing online, take your photo and make sure that it's you and submit your docs. And when you're all done with that, then come back to us and then we'll do it. So it's added a bit of friction in the process. Again, not ideal, but I think people are slowly but surely getting used to it. Also, the funding mechanism in the background changed. So the insurance and repairs is something as an add-on. Customers now choose whether or not they want that, whereas before, because it was our system, it was something that was important to us. So these two things changed in the rental model. If you're a customer and what you're seeing on the front page, this is what you would see change. A lot more obviously in the background. But this is effectively what we have as a so-called rental, or what I'm going to call now financed model going forward. We can still offer affordable heat to everyone, but it's their system, not ours.
We have about 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think I might be ahead of time here, but there's another point I wanted to speak about. So I think we can fit it in at the end. Potential developments, right? Where do we go from here? Three things, easy to remember. I think first and foremost, policy stability. When we changed from the, call it BAFA simple system to the more complicated system, it took 18 months for the market to recover, right? And this does not serve us well in the sense of zooming out and saying, we want to deploy X amount of heat pumps in Germany by 2030, for example. Slowing down the process by trying to always adapt the policy is not going to get us where we need to go fast enough. Okay, I think that number two, keep it simple. The citizens should not require an advisor to apply for a subsidy, right? It's by its very nature something that's meant to support the population, and if they can't understand what's going on, or it takes a very long time, then this is counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve. Furthermore, actually, on this point, installers. I mentioned that the market is quite fragmented, right? So we have a lot of very small installers. They themselves are moving from being installers of gas to being installers of heat, and the installation process does not look the same. It is different, and this change is being resisted, or it was. I think now you see the market sort of at a tipping point, but for a long time it was resisted, and part of that also comes in when the customers are going, hey, what about this heat pump? What about this new subsidy? And they go, oh, I have no idea what's going on here. It's too complicated. That slows adoption and impacts our ability to make the change that we'll see the change that we want. And the last thing is get the costs down, right? So, and I mean, this is what we are trying to do as, or what a sort of social leasing / rental / let's call it a general subsidy support is trying to do. So maybe approach it from a different angle and help get the costs down. What do I mean by get the cost of install down? Well, I'm actually based in Amsterdam, where it is a lot cheaper to have a heat pump installed in my home than it is in Germany. And I think there's various reasons behind this, and it's partially to do with regulation. And I think that in there, we could probably open that box up and go, where can we make it cheaper? Because it's not just straight up the fact that the system is more expensive. There are a lot of parts to the installation cost equation that could be tested, and we could look to try and reduce costs for everyone across there. And second of all, financing. So money, or it costs to get money, right? And what I mean is, if you are paying a lower installation or installment, that comes at a financing cost, right? And I do my level best to keep that cost as low as possible. We all do. But I think there's things that could be done to keep that cost even lower, so that it becomes even cheaper on a monthly basis and a total income, total cost of ownership basis for the households to be able to afford heat pumps. But I think that's probably puts me up in my time, and that's what I have to say today.
Thanks a lot, Jason. I see questions are coming into the Q&A box, so I invite you to continue pop your questions. We are now moving into the Q&A section of our webinar. Before we do that, I will invite you to visit our chat, where my colleague will post a link for you to register to the Electrification Academy series. If you do that, then you will receive all the invitations to the different webinars we're organizing, so don't hesitate to get in touch. Also, if you would like to suggest topic for future webinars. And now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Duncan, who has actually prepared a question for both speakers. Duncan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marion. It's a very simple question before we move on to the Q&A from all of our participants. But as you know, we kicked off thinking about this subject because the Commission has mentioned social leasing in the Affordable Energy Action Plan and is thinking about issuing a guidance on it. What kind of asks would you have for this Commission guidance on social leasing in general, or for heat pumps specifically for Jason? That's a question to both Marie and Jason.
I'll let Marie go first.
Sorry, I was writing the answer for a question in the chat. So could you just repeat the question? I was typing, sorry.
No problem. It's just about the fact that the Commission is working on a guidance for social leasing. And what kind of recommendations, what would you like to see in this guidance, basically? What could the Commission do?
This is not an easy question. Of course, we support the idea that the Commission could launch a platform for social leasing in Europe. We think that it could be a way to negotiate prices. So prices with car makers to support a new offer of small BEVs in Europe, because we need small BEV in different countries, and so we don't have enough to give an opportunity to middle and low income households to shift. So, but it's important to consider the difference between the role of the EU Commission, because EU Commission can gather the offer of car makers and negotiate, and the role of member states that needs to remain the master chief of their own social leasing scheme, because social leasing scheme, there is no model, as I said previously, but they really need to take into account their context and the needs of their population and the different categories of the population to propose a scheme for several years adapted in this specific context. Yeah. I have a paper on that, so I can also share this with you.
That would be great. Jason, do you want to also answer? What do you want to see in the Commission guidance?
Yeah, and in the Commission guidance, I think, like Marie touched on as well, the fact that there's a member state impact and or consideration that you need to have there as well. And I think that in the case of like what Duncan mentioned something early on that I wanted to touch on as well, which was the idea that people want to rent effectively to own at the end, right? So maybe difference between a heat pump and a car per se is that the heat pump, first of all, it takes 15 years to pay it off. I mean, you could pay it off faster, but that's just at least what the model looks like now. And it is attached to the home. Right, so we drill holes in the wall and cement to the floor, which is not as easy to drive that away. And for that reason, in fact, in Germany specifically, and I don't know how this changes per member state, but it becomes part of the home, and technically then part of it falls under the ownership of the homeowner, right? Unless so which actually makes rental quite difficult from that standpoint, at least if that's the way you're going to fund classic ways of financing rental. you would expect that you could basically just go and or let's say you could say, hey, at the end it's yours. But in Germany, if you say, hey, it's at the end of it, you can have it, or we will sell it to you for €1, like they did with PV. It becomes the homeowner's on the day, because our intention is to sell it. It's already part of the home. You can go into the legal details. So you can't do that. So then the question is, what can the commission do? Well, I think we should push to make real impact. I think it would be to reduce the cost of financing in some way, whether that's through some sort of fund or something, so that we say, hey, it's going to look different in Italy and in Germany and in France, but the fact remains that no one wants to pay interest, right? That's one thing that's sure across the board. So let's try and reduce the cost, right? And help make it more accessible for people. That's what I would say.
Thanks a lot. There's a lot of questions on the chat, and I'm gonna try to group them. I noticed that people are quite interested into the social impact of a potential social leasing scheme. And there are questions around, the type of products that could be supported. So do you see a possibility to support other clean products other than cars and heat pumps? So I would ask that to both speakers based on your experience. Also, Jason, what you're showing was, I believe, air-to-water heat pumps. Do you have also experience with geothermal heat pumps? Was one question I got. Yes, in general, how would you design a scheme so that to really be able to reach out to low-income households? And maybe that's one for Marie, because you've been looking into the demographics of the social leasing scheme in France. So perhaps let's start with Marie on the low-income households. What do you think is needed?
Yeah, maybe to be sure that social leasing could be a solution for a product, you need to have an analysis of social barriers and the social needs. This is really important to have this in the beginning. For cars, we know that there is a first rent to give several thousand euros in the beginning. This is a main barrier. We know that there is another barrier. This is the price per month. And another barrier was the insurance, the price of the insurance. We take this into account and we propose something. So it's really important to identify the barriers in the beginning and to have a social understanding of what is the problem. And after that, so the social needs and why the existing market is not sufficient. And to be able at the end to say, okay, maybe you can find the right governance system to answer and to give the right answer for the households. I don't know if it's clear, but it's not easy to understand this, to answer this question. But I think that yes, understand the needs and what is not efficient in the market.
And yeah, probably starting with a very solid evaluation of the first phase will be a good basis for figuring out how it could be improved. Jason, moving to you. So I'm wondering, so what would you imagine would be needed in order to reach out really to low-income populations in Germany?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah. So I think also maybe different, and or where heat is a bit different, is that it is a necessity, right? So when people are, I mean, maybe not, maybe I should say different. Let me use PV as a context, because your question was also what are other sort of clean. I would argue that something like putting a solar system on your roof, while it's a good clean product, is something that you can live without getting electricity from solar. Like, while it's more efficient, it's not, I wouldn't call it a necessity in the same way that you would call heat necessity. What I mean by that is you can't have a house without a heating system. So often people are making this choice not because they want to, but because they have to. And in that case, again, in that sort of bucket of customers, the only thing we can really do is try and keep the costs low there, right? And I think what's also important, maybe from a technology standpoint, is that what the total cost of ownership, right? So a gas system is going to cost you 10 to 12,000 euros. So it is a lot cheaper, but it's going to cost you more to maintain it over the life, right? Over the life of the asset over the next 10, 15, 20 years. So we need to make sure that that it makes the most sense for people for the heat pump, right? So that means there's a few things we can do. I think maybe adding a PV system would make sense for us. Maybe not on the lower side of income, but there, I mean, keeping the costs lower, keeping the upfront costs accessible, so that over the life it also makes sense. Is what I would say the goal is.
Thanks. And I see a related question on the chat that I'd like to follow up with you, Jason. So for like a private provider of leasing, what would be the incentive to offer more affordable systems? So you mentioned the high cost for heat pumps. I mean, especially in Germany, you and I had a discussion about that actually yesterday. So what could you imagine would be useful to actually drive the cost of the technology down in terms of policy design?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, look, I think that why it's tricky is because what you have in the background as well is that so if the installation is in various stages, right? You have sort of there's someone who's, for example, making sure that the system is stable on the ground. You're making sure that the system is connected to the electrical grid, or not the grid, but the house, the electricity in the house, and then feeding through the heating system, right? So you've got these sort of three parts, and each one of these people, the person that's eligible or capable of doing this is someone that has to be highly certified, which means that they have a higher rate of sort of hourly rate, shall you say, if you can call it that, right? And the problem is that because you have all of these various stakeholders that are required to install the system, and they all have such an expensive labor cost, it's going to add to the overall pricing. And I think that makes quite a big difference, because the other thing would obviously be just a cheaper system, but a cheaper asset like the actual heat pump. But we have possibilities for that as well across the board. I don't think that you'd have that is the core driving factor behind. It's sort of like we mentioned, 3x cost difference, right? I looked at the pricing. It's not wildly different. It really comes down to the installation. Maybe a second thing to add. I mentioned 99. I think it's 99% of buildings in Germany are currently built. 75% of these have oil and gas systems. So what is the game? The game is heat exchange. Okay? It's out with gas and oil, in with heat pump. What's going to eventually happen over time is that we will just be replacing the heat pump. We don't have to build it into the house because it's already there. And that over time will generate cost savings, but that's a different story. I mean, I just think something to maybe note with the market, which makes it it's kind of different.
Thanks a lot, Jason. And I have a related question to Marie. So Marie, you said that you think that social leasing is good for where we are in the market development right now. So basically, when won't we need social leasing anymore? Is that at the moment where there will be like a more vibrant market for like secondhand electric cars? What would be the signal for social leasing not to be needed anymore?
Maybe there is two main indicators. The first is on the new sales. When the market will be mature. Mature, I mean at least 50% of EVs, EV mass market, and entry level cars are there. There is enough models, affordable models. And the second indicators could be the share of EVs in the second-hand market also. Because the majority of the population buy its cars on second-hand market. So we cannot consider that there is an EV market, mass market, if there is no second-hand cars. So maybe there are the two criteria.
Thanks for that. And I have another question. So you mentioned that you would consider setting up or advising for setting up a semi-public or semi-public leasing system. And I had there were several questions about that. Do you think this would be more effective than just leaving it to the private sector? And what would be the pros and cons of doing that?
It's not clear, it's not precise yet. This is something we are working on, so work in progress, but we can observe that on car market. I said previously that prices have increased a lot. So, and we also observe that there is a strong influence of leasing company in this market. And so we wonder if there is not a link. And we can observe that leasing companies are a sort of intermediate in this market, but they can also contribute to this in this increase. And so maybe it will be more easy to have to develop a sort of public automotive fleet, a public fleet. That means that a public organization could buy some cars and rent it during 6, 7, 10 years. And it will be efficient. It could be efficient, and maybe it will be more economically efficient. So this is an assumption, but we are thinking about this because we really observe that there is a problem in the car market. That's why I insist about this point. You need to understand what is not efficient in the market of the product. This is like this for cars, but maybe there is other problem for other products. Where the market is not efficient, we have to find another solution with another government and another type of regulation.
Thanks, Marie. That's yeah, I totally share that view. I have a range of practical questions for Jason, and then I think we will slowly come to the end of our time together. So people are wondering what happens when someone is moving homes.
Yeah.
What happens to their rental contracts, or what happens when someone cannot pay their monthly installments? And have you considered portable heat pumps?
Portable heat pumps would make life a lot easier. I just worry about their efficiency because you got to heat various rooms in the home, right? So, I mean, we have not looked at them. Have I personally thought about it? Yes, absolutely. But I mean, right now we just leverage what can power the existing heating infrastructure in a home. I tried to get through some of the questions, so I was typing away frantically when Marie was speaking. But the question was, what happens when you move a home? Okay, so I think what's an easy way to think about this is that you can think of a loan, a heat pump lease, which is effectively just a loan to the customer, right? What I mean by that is that they don't have to pay 30,000; they just pay 100 or 200 or 300 bucks a month, whatever it is, for a set period of time. But it's linked to the house. Think of it as what would happen if you if you moved house or sold your house that you have a mortgage on, right? You have to pay back that mortgage, right? So a similar thing applies there, right? So because given as part of the home, it acts almost like a household debt, not household debt, a mortgage on a home. There is, of course, the option to transfer to the new homeowner, but maybe actually a good time to talk about this. It's not the tenant, right? It's the homeowner. Because you're affecting the structural integrity of the house, you're drilling holes in the wall, the structure of the house. And I mean, really, you could adjust its whole energy level. So yes, you would. It's something that is a homeowner decision, not a tenant's decision. So typically this is not someone moving home, but someone selling their home. That would see that happen. And yeah, I think that covered that point. What was the other one? Oh, I mean, if people don't pay, look, I think that yes, we have the option to go and take the system out of their home. Is that something we would want to do or have done? No, we would work with them to find a solution, right? I mean, it has a lot of negative impact on the customer and their ability to get any other sort of financing, but we wouldn't leave anyone cold for the winter, right? And then I think in general, this is not what the customers do. People typically don't want to mess with their heat. They pay their bill to make sure that they can remain warm in the winter. So that hasn't been an issue.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Well, I see a comment in the Q&A section that California is looking at how to make portable heat pumps available to low-income and multifamily apartment owners. So that's an interesting development. I think, Jason, Marie, feel free to continue typing in the chat box. It's been a very lively place, and I see a lot of interactions with the audience. This is great. I will now ask Duncan if, Duncan, we just have a few minutes left. Could you perhaps summarize what you have learned from this session, what your takeaway would be?
I'm not sure I can do it in just a few minutes because this is called the Electrification Academy, this series, and I put an emphasis on the word academy because it is a chance to learn a lot about what we're discussing. The topic is quite new to me. I've worked on heat for a long time, but the idea of social leasing for heat pumps and EVs period is new. So it's been very illuminating. I like the topic, the way we've structured it today, because it connects two important sectors. Normally we talk about decarbonizing transport or decarbonizing heat, almost like separate entities. But it's important that we learn lessons from each other, from each of these sectors, and we figure out what can work for EVs in this type of policy and how to apply that to heat pumps. So it's really great to have two experts talking about that independently here today. Now, what do I see as sort of the links between EVs and heat pumps? Well, we're dealing with a higher upfront cost for a clean and sometimes premium product. We sometimes see higher ownership rates among wealthy individuals who have received subsidies in the past. This has been brought up. This can give the impression to the public that transitioning to clean products is expensive, that it's only for households with large incomes. And this is kind of a public barrier that needs to be addressed. But what we do know is that the public likes these products. Marie pointed out that in France for EVs, they're widely accepted. People like the program. And we've seen European surveys that by Cool Products that show that heat pump owners are very satisfied with their heat pumps as well. So we know that across the range of income deciles, they're widely appreciated. And then finally, Jason was just talking about this point. One of my random notes that I made over the last hour. These products are important for our day-to-day lives. So I don't personally own a car, but many people do. And if they rely on that to get to work or pick up their kids from school or perform the daily chores, they need to be able to count on it and be able to step in if the car breaks down. And I think that there could be a role for social leasing to play here in that sense. Also for in the heating sector, if your boiler breaks down in February, you would want to have potentially a leasing system in place that could step in quicker than you fronting the upfront purchase yourself, even with the subsidy, especially for lower income households, this is the case. So in both of these cases, we're trying to solve a couple of different problems. One is that we have a high upfront expense. Another is that we tend to have inconsistent policy support that can lead to unstable demand and a lack of clear signals to the industry to invest. And third thing is that we have a risk of low-income households being left behind. So what kind of policy considerations came to mind? One is the criteria for social leasing. So income, as Marie mentioned, or dependency on the product. So in the case of heat pumps, perhaps, this is just my own random thought today, a social leasing scheme could depend on replacing an inefficient gas or oil boiler as a priority. We also need to think about how to design the public subsidy. So one, in order to minimize the cost of the scheme, so it's acceptable to governments from the public purse. Another two is to ensure that the lowest income deciles are well represented as the beneficiaries. We saw the lowest ones in Marie's chart being some of the smallest deciles. And three, we would like to avoid these windfall effects that were brought up as well. So we need to consider the governance of this scheme. And I'm just about done. Finally, two more thoughts. We want to make sure it's simple, that it shouldn't be burdensome and complicated to apply. Jason pointed this out very nicely. And then we want to reduce the cost of financing, because I think when you're talking about this social leasing schemes, that tends to be, as pointed out by our guests, a big barrier. So yeah, that was longer than I intended, but lots to think about today. And thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
Yes, huge thanks to both of you. It was really interesting. It's just a start, so we will continue engaging on that topic. I invite you to register to our mailing list if you want to be informed of the upcoming webinars. There is a link in the chat. And with that, we will see you very soon, and have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye.